Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another wonderful tasting of the Virtual Tasting Society. Today, we're excited to welcome back a brand we got to discover a few years back, fell in love with, and we're excited to see their latest expressions, what's going on at the distilleries, all the things happening at Mars Whiskey. Chris Lane, it works for the importer. You guys are High Road Spirits, correct?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes, Chris Lane is here to share his experience, his knowledge on both of the distilleries we're going to be tasting today. Mars is the parent company, and then you guys have the. I'll let you do all the talking, but
No, no, it's
Chris
good. It's
Lane
good.
is our local rep. He's amazing, and he's here to share all his wisdom on all things Japanese whiskey. High Road Spirits imports some of the most sought after and most delicious Japanese whiskeys in the US market. Very much focused on a lot of Japanese spirits. Um, but I will, all that said, I'll let Chris introduce himself and tell us more about what he does and what we're tasting today.
Awesome. Thanks so much, man. Thank you guys for showing up on it's a Thursday, right? It's a Thursday night. I'm always just kind of like, oh, that's right. This thing is going on. Like, this is the end of the day, but it still feels like it's not quite the end of the day. So thank you for showing up. It's very much appreciated. If there is any point where there are small shadows running across the computer and the screen, it's because I've got two kittens that are a little bit unruly tonight and they're causing some havoc. So if you see that, don't mind. It's just me being distracted by two small animals. Um, as Vadim said, my name's Chris. I work for High Red Spirits. We're a really small importer who deal with a lot of really, really big name Japanese brands. There are only currently four of us working in the United States. We only deal with independent and family-owned distilleries. So, additionally, when it comes to things from Japan, we also work with producers who are in Haiti, Mexico, India, Korea, actually, kind of all over. Um, a number of years back, I want to say, I think the first time I did a session with you guys, it was probably for the Irish Boys, wasn't it? It's for Two Stacks and Cologne.
I think so. Yeah, that's what was start. That's what kicked us off. You guys don't rep them
Yeah.
anymore, right?
No, sadly. Those guys actually made the smart move though. They went with another importer where they were specifically focused on bringing in just their brand as far as Irish whiskey. So it's not just like an Irish whiskey brand that's already like niche and kind of like in this like weird in between space because they're not a Middleton brand and then trying to break them out when it comes to Japanese whiskey and everything else. It's just a little bit jarring. So I think they made the right call, but I do very much miss working with them because they're amazing people and they make really, really fucking good whiskey. Tonight we're going to be talking about Mars. The company has gone through a couple different kind of iterations that you might seen like printed names out there. One was Mars Humbo. That's kind of how they're kind of colloquially referred to. Humbo is the family who owns Mars. So this is still a family-owned company, and Humbo, that family has been in based in Kagoshima, making shochu since the 1800s. So we'll kind of go into a little bit of the history, but just really, really quickly, just because I'm not sure how many of you guys were here for the last one I did, because we did do a Mars tasting a number of years back. But how familiar are you guys with A, Japanese whiskey, and B, Mars?
I'd say start from the beginning. There's a lot of new faces today.
Okay, fantastic. That's great. So usually the way I like to do these things, which is a little bit different, obviously when it's in virtual, but it's helpful for me, is please ask questions. Obviously like we can moderate this in chat, but the best way to kind of keep this poppy and interesting is to ask a lot of questions, because otherwise it's just me monologuing about these whiskeys, and that gets real boring real fast. Um, so the more interaction, the more questions, the better. And I'll definitely like lean on Vadim to put that together. Tasting order. So we're gonna start with EY Tradition. Then we're gonna go into the EY Tradition Sherry Cask Finish. Then it'll be Komagatake, then Sanuki, then YA2, and then YA3. Um, Palette wise, we're going to be kind of jumping all over the place today. It's just kind of how it happens when you have a couple different distilleries rep by the same company. But really, let's
Chris,
just
can
crack.
can you run that lineup by me again? I just realized Jane's not here today, and there's no one to take notes, so I have to do it. Run that
Oh yeah,
lineup one
all
more
good,
time.
all
I'll
good, all
toss it in the
good. Yeah,
chat.
don't sweat it, don't sweat it. So the first one up is EY Tradition.
EY tradition.
Yep. Second is the Tradition, but the Sherry cast finish. Third in the line is Komagatake 24, and then it goes to Sanuki 24, then YA number two, then YA three.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So I'd say pour yourself some EY Tradition if you guys have not already. I'll just say a quick kampai and say thank you very much for joining us. And let's take a little slug of whiskey and I'll start talking a little history and some blending stuff. Serious. So EY Tradition, anytime you see EY on one of these bottles, and it's spelled IWAI. So it's still like most people, even if they know how to pronounce this word, usually comes out in just a kind of jumble of vowels. The easiest way to remember is just by saying E and Y next to each other. That's just the guy's name. EY was the founder of this company, way back in the 40s. And so anything that says EY on it is a blend. So this is a malt and grain blend. All of these are coming from the Komagatake distillery, which is it's in Nagano. So this first one is a blend of 70% malted barley, 30% grain. It's aged in a combination of, the classic ex-bourbon, like everybody uses, a little bit of sherry cask, and then red wine cask. It does have a very, very minimal amount of peated malt in it. So I'd say, we're not measuring ppms on this one, but it's definitely sub four, probably sub three. Um, but this is very much their flagship introductory blend. This is kind of like this is the thing that's kind of gets people hooked into these whiskeys, whether you know them or not. It's an approachable price point. You can usually find it on the shelf for around $50. And it's 80 proof and just kind of like it does the thing. It's good on the rocks, it's good on its own. I like it in a highball. Just very, very simple. Quick note on highballs for anybody. If you guys make these at the house, couple tips. One, use the most aggressively bubbly soda water you can find. Do not use mineral water. It doesn't hold up. The bubbles are too large and they dissipate too quickly. There's too much actual content of mineral in it and it alters the flavor of the highball itself. So use seltzer water, something like either Fever Tree or Q are good options. Um, Make sure that stuff is just absolutely frigid cold. If you want to go the extra mile, make sure your whiskey is ice cold as well. And then kind of the easy to remember formula for making a highball is 4 parts of soda water to 1 part of whiskey. So I usually do it at like 1.25 ounces of whiskey to 4 ounces of soda. Really, the idea is because you're not trying to have a whiskey and soda, you're trying to have a whiskey highball in the Japanese fashion, which is to proof it down with soda water so that you're having something that's going to have the refreshment level and the kind of the ABV, level respectively of like a beer or a glass of wine. So it's less about drinking spirit, more about having something just kind of crushable and sessionable. Um, so out of the lineup today, this makes a fantastic highball for the house. Um, Now that we've got that out of the way, I'm going to talk a little history. Uh, got somebody asking about the tasting order. Cool. So, Mars has got a really fascinating story. These guys, like, we can get into a little bit of the kind of contemporary history of Japanese whiskey when this opens up. We have a little bit more conversation and people are a little bit more lubricated with alcohol. But for now, we'll just kind of talk about like where these guys came from and why they're important in the landscape. So basically, way back in the day, we're talking, the story that everybody knows, which you can't actually tell the story of Japanese whiskey without talking about Nika and Suntory because they were started by the same person. So there's a guy named Masataka Takatsuru who was a bit of a prodigy. He worked for a company called Setsuo Shuzo, which was it's like what's the way to describe these guys? It was a distillery, but it wasn't like Setsuo Shuzo was not making like elegant liqueurs or spirits. These they were essentially making kind of like cruder distillates that you were going to cut down with beet sugars, port wine, fruit, anything to kind of make it approachable and palatable to the Japanese. And this is back in like right around like 1915. So uh basically Takatsuya has been working at this company for a little while. He came from a sake making family. He actually had, I want to say he had a degree in chemical engineering from Osaka University. And at that point in Osaka U, that was the only space that actually had any sort of training on distillation. So that's where he learned it. So Taketsuru kind of is like puts his work in at Setsuo Shuzo. His boss is a dude named Kichiro Iwai. So the name is familiar. That's the first whiskey that we're trying. So his direct boss is the one who essentially says, "Look, you're a bright kid. Right now, Japan is opening up from its 200 years of isolation. We're open to trade. We're looking to what the rest of the world is doing. I want to send you to Scotland to learn Western distillation." So basically, this kernel of an idea of Japan even making something like single malt whiskey all comes from Iwai-san. So he sends Taketsuru to Scotland. It's an absolutely insane story. Basically, this is right around the time of World War One. So from Japan, he travels to California, through the United States, out New York, and then travels from New York to Scotland. In doing so, he almost gets sunken by a U-boat. The commuter vessel he was on almost gets blown out of the water because he's going through, war-torn environment. But he makes it to Scotland, and the idea is essentially like he's going to be going and studying at the University of Glasgow, where they have a distillation program, and he would effectively start to learn this Western distillation, so he could bring it back to Japan. Um, Now, that said, this is in like roughly about 1916, 1917. Um, Nobody knows what to make of this guy when he shows up in Scotland because no one's ever seen a Japanese person before. Like everybody thought he looked like a weird Spaniard. That's kind of what they assumed he was. So he was getting iced out of pretty much everything. He wasn't getting any sort of apprenticeships. He wasn't getting into distilleries. It just wasn't happening. Basically, dude has a good relationship with his host family, who he is staying with. They have basically the oldest son and him practice judo together. Somehow, I don't know how that family had a kid who knew judo, but that was a thing that they were doing. So he kind of got in. He was kind of getting assimilated that way, and then the host family's best friends had an elder daughter. Her name was Rita. Rita Cohen is kind of a major part of the story of Japanese whiskey because she's the one who actually made introductions for Taketsuru to get into distilleries and to get apprenticeships. So, with her blessing and kind of forcefulness, he gets in and starts learning how to make whiskey. Um, this kind of spirals into a big thing where if essentially they had a very, very strong friendship. That friendship blossomed into a romance, and they eventually ended up getting married. So essentially, it's this wild, wild story about a guy going to Scotland from Japan, you know, pre 1920, falling in love with a Scottish woman, getting introduced to these different distilleries, marrying her, and taking her with him back to Japan. So he apprentices. He apprentices at a number of different places. Some in the lowlands. Most notably, I think probably one that everybody will know is he studied in Campbelltown. So he actually did an apprenticeship at Hazelburn for about 3 years. And I always like to point that out because I think that's a really, really interesting point of DNA for these whiskeys. If you guys are used to having Campbelltown whiskeys, specifically Springbank, I think there is a lot of similarity in the way those whiskeys are made and the kind of notes that you get out of them that you get in some really, really well-made Japanese whiskeys. So he is on his way back, makes it back to Japan. He's got this knowledge. He's essentially written everything out that he has done in something that is actually known to this day as the Taketsuru Doctrine, which is all of his notes on how to make whiskey. So this is like literally down from, it's how to malt, how to mash, various temperatures, how things ferment, also like not just how to distill, but how to repair a still, how to build a still. He was really, really comprehensive and he was a complete savant. He was like kind of on some Brain Man type shit. Like he was really, really, really invested in this stuff and recorded everything to a very minute detail. So he wrote this all down and brought it with him back to his boss, Iwai-san, and gave him his notes. And the idea was that the two of them were going to start a distillery with with essentially Setsuo Shuzo, and hopefully the higher up there would give them blessing, give them money, and then they'd be able to actually get a whiskey distillery off the ground. Now, the unfortunate bit is that Takatsuru was already engaged to the owner of Setsuo Shuzo's daughter. So when he came home with a Scottish bride, this is kind of like a part of the story that they don't, lean on too heavily because it's kind of scandalous, and nobody wants to, bring that kind of shame into the family. But love happens, and he ended up falling in love with Rita. So when he came back and tried to start a distillery with Iwai-san, he came home with a Scottish bride, and Iwai was like, "I can't do this with you. Like, this is not a good look. You've got, you've dishonored, your name, the boss. Like, I can't make this happen." Basically like peace, like we're just not going to do this. So that's when Takatsuru actually split off, and then he partnered with his old college buddy Shinji Otori. So that is how Suntory happened. Basically, one door closed and another door opened. So that's when Takatsuru went off. He started Yamazaki Distillery. He worked with Suntory for 10 years, and then he kicked rocks up to Hokkaido and started Yoichi. Um, Fascinating dude, really, really interesting story. But that's the thing that's kind of crazy about Mars is that you've got this guy who started this idea, who was like, "This is my idea. I want to make Japanese whiskey." He found the right guy to do it. There was just a hitch, and it just wasn't going to come to pass. So, um, unfortunately, Iwai-san was not able to actually get funding to start a distillery for quite some time. So, you know, uh, God, the first drops of distillate were pulled off the stills at Yamazaki in November 1924. So we're literally just over 100 years of Japanese whiskey being a thing. It took Iwai-san another 25 years to actually get funding to open a distillery. So he partnered with the Hombo family from Kagoshima. So Hombo family, very well known, very well respected, classically shochu producers, always very, very forward thinking. So they partnered, they started their distillery in 1949, but it wasn't actually operational until 1960. So you've got this long gestation of an idea that's been going forever with this guy. So he wasn't even able to make whiskey until the 1960s. So that's how the company was started. They literally hit every pothole, roadblock, kind of bit of insanity you could throw at a distillery, especially for what was happening in Japan at that point with these different whiskey distilleries that some of them popped up were basically like the first iterations of both Suntory and Nika. Everybody hated. The populace did not like them. The same was true for Mars. It's all because that came from the notes that Takatsuru had, which is making these whiskeys that were oilier, smokier, kind of bigger, chewier. Like they had, proof to them. These were not flavors that were very common in Japanese beverage at that point. So none of this stuff went particularly well. And then basically in the 60s and 70s, Japanese whiskey was essentially, for lack of a better term, it was a race to the bottom. Um, so it was about making things faster, cheaper, and essentially just getting distillate into people's hands so they could mix it with something, not unlike kind of what was happening in the United States, right? It's like we didn't really, really lean into this idea of like what craft whiskey is. I mean, it's gone on kind of like, a bit of a roller coaster, but, you know, nobody was asking for high end bourbon in the 1980s for the most part, or the 70s. It just happened to be around. So that's how the company got started. I'm going to take a break to say we should move to the second whiskey, which is
Question,
the
question before you do that.
yeah, please, please.
So I'm on Wine Searcher because that's a good idea. Um, so there's a bunch of Mars Iwai tradition editions.
Uh-huh.
Uh, which one are we drinking?
You're drinking the classic, which is just one that has a white label. So it's literally just called EY Tradition. So they
Okay.
have different ones with different cask finishes. So I'm sure you're probably seeing ones that have like Sakura cask or Umeshu cask or red wine cask.
Yeah.
Yeah, so those are all seasonal releases of the same whiskey. They just get a little extra cask finishing on them.
Gotcha.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because I found it at Remedy, but that has a blue label.
So the blue label, that is just EY blended whiskey. So
Okay.
that's
Okay.
actually so there are two whiskeys that are also in this line of blends. One is called EY, just straight up we call it EY Blue colloquially because it's got a blue label. And then the other one is called EY 45, which is both of those whiskeys are the inverse malt to grain proportions. So those whiskeys are primarily grain whiskey. They're about 70% grain whiskey, 30% malted barley, entirely aged in ex-bourbon barrels. Those are kind of like your introductory handshake whiskeys that you can either have to rip as a shot or to use to mix in cocktails.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I mean, I'm really a fan of this one. It's and I yeah.
I'm glad you like it. I think it's definitely something that like this is one of those whiskeys that people sleep on. I think speaking solely for myself, when I first started buying these whiskeys was back in about 2013 when they were first imported to the States. 2015. That sounds about right. Um, and I just didn't know what to make of them. I didn't particularly know what the flavors were. I didn't know what the bottle shape was about because the bottles are a little cheesy looking. Now I've kind of come to love them, but basically, like they've got this kind of bulbous top and they've got this etching around the side of it. And what that's supposed to represent is the mountain range behind one of the distilleries. But they're very, very proud of this bottle. So that is what they're all coming in forever. Like it's not changing. Um,
Except EY 45 comes in that giant, like almost 2 liter bottle.
Yeah, and that's something that we requested them do for the American market.
Oh,
Like
cool.
we basically it's like we wanted to have, because Americans just love things that are bigger. We're like, all right, cool. Can we put that in Isho bins? So it's a 1.8 liter bottle of 90 proof Japanese whiskey, which is a pretty great thing to show up to a party with. I did that actually at 4th of July and everybody lost their mind. So it was perfect. Um, So, just because you were asking about those additional cask finishes for this whiskey, this next one that we have is the sherry cask finish. So, this whiskey already does use, pardon me, sherry barrels in its maturation process. It's part of the blend, but this sees an additional about 6 months in a PX cask. So, kind of a weird it's a bit of a weird whiskey to jump into on the second, but it's kind of one of those things where do you go by flavor or do you go by proof? So, this is definitely a sherry forward whiskey, but it's also kind of like a nice, soft, rich, like wintertime whiskey that I like this one on the rocks quite a bit. And for anybody who missed the kind of intro part of what these whiskeys are, these first two whiskeys are essentially the same thing, just with different cask finishing, but it is 70% malted barley, 30% grain. It gets ex-bourbon, usually Oloroso sherry cask, a little bit of red wine cask, and then it has a minimal amount of peat in the malt. Um, so anytime you see EY, it just means it's a blend.
And when you say grain, are you guys using corn predominantly?
So yeah, it's going to be mostly maize, and it's the thing that is like, it's funny. I always kind of, you think, or at least for me, whenever I'm like, oh, it's corn whiskey, it's got to be coming from the United States. Not true at all. Most of it's coming from the Most of it's coming from the UK and actually New Zealand.
Wait, you mean like the corn or the whiskey that's already made?
The whiskey that's already made, because basically there is. So we'll jump ahead a little bit just because we're talking about these blends because it is important. Down the line, when you're talking about Japanese whiskey in general, um, and actually like, well, let's see, one thing at a time. So, um, there are only currently one, two, three. There are only three operational distilleries in Japan that have column stills to make grain whiskey. Those three distilleries used to sell their finished whiskey internally to the rest of Japanese distilleries so they could actually make blends out of them. Then, right around 2010, they closed their doors because there was actually just way too much demand for it. So the people that had these distilleries, which were essentially Suntory, Nika, and then actually Fuji Gotemba, they all were supplying this grain whiskey. They all said, "Hey, look, sorry guys, you're on your own." So now, anytime you see a blended whiskey that is coming from Japan that is not from one of those distilleries, it means that the grain component is coming from somewhere else, like that it's coming from outside of Japan. And that's just based on like supply and demand by the nature of how it is. It's got to be from somewhere else. So to that, I'm just really quickly before I dive into this, because I don't want to like open up a whole gaping maw of issues before we need to, because I assume we'll start talking about it in a little bit. Um, do you guys know about the whiskey labeling standards that have passed in Japan and kind of like what that kind of entails and what that means?
I think we should talk about it. That's brand new, right? Has it passed? I know the distilleries were signing up or brands were signing on to it.
Yeah, so okay, so real fast. Basically like the deal is in Japan, as far as the tax code is concerned, whatever you bottle in Japan can be called Japanese whiskey. It could be vodka with caramel coloring, it could be rum, it could that, gets a little bit of new make whiskey. It does not matter. As long as it's bottled there, they can call it whatever they want. And so this has been an issue that has kind of like it really traces its roots back to how Japanese whiskey was started because it Japanese whiskey was not started outside of what Takatsu's vision of it was going to be as anything other than a means to kind of like gives people an inexpensive means by getting a buzz, right? So these things were incredibly adulterated. They had lots of different additives in them, a lot of bullshit. A lot of them were actually, which is actually a tradition that endures to this day. Half of the Japanese whiskey that was out there in the 1960s and 70s, that was all just Scotch that had like maybe a little bit of Japanese new make in it. Um, if that, but mostly it was just rebottled Scotch. So now that we've kind of come to this point in time, there's a consortium of makers in Japan, which is I'm forgetting the actual title because it's a really, really long acronym, but it's a collection of beverage makers in Japan between sake, shochu, and whiskey. And they've all come together to essentially say, we're the people that are leading the charge in this industry. This is what we believe in. We're the people that are making this stuff. This is what we define our whiskey as. So basically now, if it is called Japanese whiskey, it has to be a single malt whiskey that is aged for no less than 3 years. So pretty much the exact same as Scotland. It has to use Japanese water. It has to be, let me think, mashed. It has to be mashed, distilled, and aged entirely in Japan, bottled in Japan, and cut with Japanese water. That's kind of like the broad strokes of what it is. It doesn't have any sort of stipulation on it needing to be Japanese malt that's in there because there's so little of it. But that's kind of like the broad strokes of what people have agreed that defines what Japanese whiskey is. So that means that if it is a malt and grain blend, it cannot say Japanese whiskey on it. So neither of these whiskeys from Mars that say EY tradition on them. I know, sorry, this is backwards, but you won't see Japanese whiskey on this bottle. You will see Mars whiskey, you will see just whiskey, but it's not going to say Japanese whiskey. Um, the rest of the labeling standards dictate that if you are not a Japanese whiskey, you are prohibited from using Japanese iconography on the label. So, you know, basically like you can't use a samurai, you can't use a rising sun, you can't use Mount Fuji, you can't use any of these kind of like iconic images that you'd associate with Japan because that essentially gives the impression that this thing is more Japanese than it may actually be. And so the Japanese are trying to come up with a bit of transparency on all this. The challenge with all this is that this is a consortium of peers. This is not a governmental agency. So that's why they're called labeling standards and suggestions. These are not laws. So it's a good thing to remember. So a lot of the writing that I've read about this stuff kind of talks about it like Japan is like actually taking these steps to make it like it's been passed. Now this has been written into law, and now no one's going to be making quote unquote fake Japanese whiskey by just putting scotch in a bottle and calling it Japanese. Um, they can still do that if they choose to. But the difference is that it's a bit of that kind of like lead by example that Japan is really well known for, which is if you're the only person that is not conforming to these labeling standards out of a whole consortium of your peers, then you're the one that's going to look like the asshole and you're going to get knocked down. So that's actually kind of the direct line they've taken in all this is just saying like, we're all the people that agree in terms of what this is. If you have foreign distillate in your blend, you need to reveal what that is. So very famously, Nika stepped up and said, "Oh yeah, like Nika from the barrel is actually just mostly Ben Nevis." Like that's when that all kind of came through, right? So all these things are kind of coming together at a relatively heady time when everyone's trying to make sense of like why this is. I'm taking a very long detour with this, so I apologize, but kind of once you crack this particular can of worms, you got to kind of keep it going. Um, there are a number of different things that really confuse the issue of what Japanese whiskey is. One of them being that um, the American TTB doesn't discriminate. So the agency that says what is and what is not a thing to the United States, they're not going to say like, no, 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 that's not Japanese whiskey because in fact that is Scotch or because actually that's shochu. There are a ton of different brands out there that label themselves Japanese whiskey when really they are just long aged shochu. Do you guys all know what shochu is?
That's going to be a no.
Got
With
it.
the
Cool.
rice?
Thank you. So shochu is actually, it's really important to this whole conversation because it is, in fact, Japan's national beverage. This is generally speaking a single distilled spirit that is fermented with a substance called koji, which is essentially like a rice mold. It's a very, very flavorsome, kind of expressive mold, so it really does alter the flavor of the final distillate. But shochu can be made of many, many different things, but famously, it's made from rice, barley, and sweet potatoes. This is not to be confused with soju, that's Korean. It's multiply distilled. It's basically vodka at a very, very low proof. Soju is really expressive. It's very, very interesting. It's kind of like, it's a really, really deep rabbit hole to go down. And in fact, most of the contemporary kind of like new school whiskey makers in Japan all came from shochu making families because that is a very, very hard spirit to make. So the where this kind of gets confusing is that shochu is not typically barrel aged. Sometimes there is barrel that gets used for it, but there are laws in place, actual governmental laws in Japan that say if your shochu is aged and it is past a certain color, like if it looks like this, like that dark, you cannot call that shochu in Japan. You have to now sell that as a liqueur. So you have a lot of these producers that have been barrel aging shochu for many, many years. Sometimes they just have things sitting in racks that have been gone for a really long time. that end up in the United States as whiskey, because here we're not going to discriminate. So it's probably a rice spirit aged or that's been fermented with koji, probably aged in sherry casks for 12, 15, 18, 20 years. Um, do I think those spirits are bad? Absolutely not. Actually, I think they're delicious. They're really, really tasty, but it's confusing because it confuses the issue of what Japanese whiskey is, especially when you talk to the producers who have been making this stuff for decades. So when you're talking about this kind of consortium of peers, you've got Nika, Suntory, Akashi, Chichibu, Mars, Konosuke, Akeshi, Fuji Gotemba. It's literally like all the big players are doing this. So it's very, very much a thing that's kind of in movement right now. So as it stands, these are labeling standards that the Japanese have put forward. But the word around the campfire is that the government is finally getting involved, and they're essentially going to be kind of doing a similar thing that Mexico did with mezcal, where they'll have a holographic sticker that they put on the side of it that's government mandated that says that this is officially a product of Japan that adheres to these labeling standards that we have defined. Um, I wouldn't expect that very soon. As it is known, the bureaucracy in Japan is very thick, and nothing moves quickly. So um, now that I've gone down the rabbit hole of what is confusing about Japanese whiskey and what it can and cannot be, basically, you got to kind of know a little bit and put some research down as to what you're drinking. Otherwise, chances are, as consumers, we, fall for a pretty package. If it looks like a bunch of beautiful kanji on a label and maybe looks mysteriously like a bottle of Yamazaki 18, and says that it's a 22-year-old whiskey on it, you might want to do a little bit of research on that if you're only paying, $100 for that whiskey. So it's tricky waters right now. Does that all kind of make sense? I feel like I'm talking into a void a little bit because nobody else is responding.
Does. No, it makes a lot of sense. We're actually going to be tasting a rice-based whiskey next month. So I'm glad you started the conversation because those of us who are interested can actually taste those next month. And
Oh, and I think I saw it in the comments. It's with Oishi.
yes,
Yeah, those guys make good stuff. It's tasty. It's like I have no issue with how that stuff is made. It's really delicious.
it's
Like,
just yeah, it's good tasting, and I think it's a very good discussion to have of like we in America, rice is a grain, distilled grain aged in wood is whiskey.
mhm.
Right? In Japan, you wouldn't call it whiskey, but here, that's literally what the DTV wants you to call it. So
Right.
it's a discussion worth having of like, okay, at the end of the day, does the spirit taste good? Okay, what do you want us to call it so that people understand what it is? Because by American standards, that is a whiskey. By Japanese standards, it is not. So like, but like calling it a
Yeah.
shochu is like nobody will understand what that is. It's already an uphill battle as is.
Yeah, well, I think that's part of the issue, right? Is that like, you know, for us at least in terms of like, working with shochu producers and whiskey producers, it kind of takes the piss out of both sides because now you have this thing that like nobody knows what it is. Is it whiskey? Is it shochu? And shochu is a much harder sell in the United States, obviously, than whiskey is. So it's this thing where it's like shochu producers are really, really putting a lot of like the Japanese government's putting a lot of money into trying to get shochu to be a thing in the US and actually just anywhere outside of Japan. But it gets really confusing when, it's like, is it shochu? Is it whiskey? But at the end of the day, I think, pardon me, as consumers, um, you vote with your dollars, but also like you should be buying something that you just think is delicious. Like at the end of the day, if you like it, if it's not hurting anybody, I definitely have certain producers who I won't touch with a 10-foot pole because I just don't agree with their practices. This is not one of those situations. Like I think that there's a lot of merit. It just gets confusing. And I think for the producers I represent, they're very, very much, like any of these guys, like same as like any artist, they're very proud of what they make and they want it to be taken seriously and they don't want there to be a lot of questions as to is it real or fake or however it kind of comes out. And I think that's actually kind of part of the conversation that's a little challenging is that any of these whiskeys that they might have scotch in them, they might be a shochu that's been aged for a long time. They were kind of colloquially tagged as being quote unquote fake Japanese whiskeys, which is a pretty damning thing to say. You know, there's an argument that makes that very true, but it also is kind of like the instant you call something a fake, you take the value out of it. And I think that takes a lot of the joy out of drinking something that you might like. So it's a shitty thing to do to people that are just trying to like, spend 50, $60 on a bottle and not like have to worry too much about it. So,
I think
anyways,
we all
oh,
agree that
sorry,
it comes
please.
down to transparency, right? It's as
Yeah,
long as you're not trying to mislead people, that's really the number one thing. What do you know where
totally.
Japan stands on labeling kind of because the SWA has certain things like that you can't put on the label.
Right.
How's Japan about it? Like, I have no problem with a rice-based spirit if on the label it says Japanese whiskey made out of rice. Okay, cool, whatever. It's a personal
Sure.
preference. I want to try that because I want to try
Sure, sure.
whiskey from all over the world made in a million different ways. Just like we have, there's a distillery here in California that makes whiskey out of IPA, and
Right.
technically it's if because it has hops in it, you can't call it whiskey. It's a flavored spirit made with hops, right? It's
Talking about
delicious.
Charbet.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And like San
Yeah.
Diego Distillery made a similar thing where it's absolutely delicious, but just transparency is all.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's the thing. And like you know, that's part of the issue that's a little bit challenging with anything from Japan is that there's a bit of a schism even with newer producers where it's culturally it is not something they have been raised or trained to do to divulge what and how they make a thing. This kind of goes back to like the old school of like really just like this kind of somewhat because of a shokunin philosophy of that thing where it's like you work at something your entire life in the search of perfection while you know wholeheartedly there's no such thing as perfection. You're just trying to make it the best possible thing you can. So, sake producers, there's no collaboration there. All these guys are kind of like everything is, I hate to call it cloak and dagger, but it's just culturally not a thing they do. They don't share how a thing is made. So, which makes it very difficult from my end because that's my job is to figure out how these things are made. So some of the distilleries I work with are very transparent. Konosuke is a great example of that. Those guys are they're a much newer distillery and they're really, really have a much more kind of like global mindset to how they want to release their whiskeys. And they want to tell you from soup to nuts exactly how the thing is made. Um,
I mean,
Chichibu will definitely chirp up if you give them enough prompts and ask them questions. But generally speaking, it's kind of like, no, you just like it, right? It's just good. Just drink it. And that's actually Mars is somewhere in between those points. They are not the most transparent, but they will definitely volunteer information that a lot of people will not.
so it's kind of interesting because I saw a clip a little while ago about an American who went to Japan to try and figure out some sort of trade. And I don't know if it was knife making or whatever it was. And it's kind of irrelevant for the whole situation as well. And he asked his translator to ask this guy who's done this for his life, right? To how he can become his apprentice. And the
Mhm.
response from the translator was, "Yeah, that's not going to happen."
Right.
Um, but he was there for some days, and then this old guy looked at him, said something to the translator, and she was in complete and utter shock because he had basically asked him, "Do you want to be an apprentice?" So yes, and there, when you're an apprentice in a trade, there is no telling you any information. You watch,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
and and you just watch for 3 days, and then okay, now go make some. And
Mm.
then once you spend a day doing that, the guy comes and look at you kind of like, yeah, that's good, that's good, that's not good, that's not good, whatever. Okay, fix them. No direction as to what needs to be fixed. It's kind of like, well, it's obvious that they're not right. Figure it out. So I think it's a very interesting Japanese culture thing, right? Where that's not how you do things, but that's also what they say is that's how you get to perfection. People never think, yeah, I'm good at this. They just think they're less bad than they were, 10 years ago.
Right. Right. Yeah, I mean it's interesting because I mean like this is a country that was closed off for 2 centuries, right? And Japanese whiskey specifically, if we're talking about this, you're talking about I mean like legitimately to this day there are two companies that dominate the conversation when it comes to Japanese whiskey. Suntory and Nika, because those companies were set up by the same guy, Takatsuru. Um, uh, this is not hyperbole. They're basically like cats in a bag. They're still fiercely competitive to this day, and they're very, very, very careful with what information they reveal about what they do with their whiskey because of this competitive nature. Because it really just was them going head to head for the longest time, and there really wasn't a lot of room for like anybody else who might have another voice or like have another perspective on what kind of whiskey was being made. So now that is all very much changed, even though kind of shreds of that, live on, at least culturally, in terms of how it goes. So I think that's actually a great place to jump into the first single malt that we're going to have, which is from Komagatake. So this is 100 proof. This distillery is Mars's flagship distillery. They are in Nagano. So this whiskey was unpeated. This is a pretty new expression. So unpeated, ex-bourbon barrel, sherry cask, and then red wine barrels in this one. This is one of Mars's two distilleries. They kind of like what I was talking about earlier with the history of them. They started in Kagoshima, right? Which is way, way, way down south in the very, very like bottom of Japan. You have those kind of three main islands in Japan. You've got Hokkaido in the north, you've got Honshu in the center, which is really where the kind of hub of when we think of things that are Japanese, Tokyo, Osaka, Kyoto, that's all in Honshu. And then you've got Kyushu, which is the southern island, which is really more of Japan's breadbasket. Like that is where the majority of like crops come from. If you're talking about things like Kurabuta, so black pig, like really, really good pork, Wagyu, all comes from Kyushu for the most part. Ramen was invented in Kyushu, I believe. So you have these like very, very kind of like strong leanings of like food and beverage in that area. It's also that southern island is the home of shochu production. It's warm, it's humid, it's most areas are at sea level. So we'll get into talking about them a little bit. But the reason I wanted to bring it up is because they actually moved their distillery from down in Kagoshima up to initially it went to Yamanashi in the 1970s, where Mars actually owns a winery. So a lot of the wine barrels that actually come from or that are blended into these whiskeys come from their winery. They make a number of different types of wines. Um, Pinot, Chard, they do their kind of version of port. They do a version of sherry there. They do brandies. It's a lot of different stuff. But they had the distillery in Yamanashi, and then the stills broke, and then they're like, "All right, well, I guess we're starting over." So they moved the whole operation a little bit further north and a little bit further east to Nagano, and that was in the early 80s, and they resumed production in 1985, I want to say. So basically, like this distillery is crushing at this point. The 1980s are a great time for Japanese whiskey because in Japan, the economy was booming at that point. If you think about the 80s, like the biggest exports from Japan were cars and electronics. So they were just killing it. So there was a lot of internal pride in terms of like the product they would have that they were selling and making. So sake was big, Japanese whiskey was big. Those were two things that were really, really going strong. So these guys were really getting a good momentum in the 80s with this new location in Nagano, now that they effectively were the highest elevation distillery in Japan. That's still to this day. Komagatake is the highest elevation distillery. And that name, which is not the easiest thing to say ever, um, it refers to the mountain range up behind the distillery, and the tallest peak is actually called Kolmagatake, and it means horse mountain. So they were kind of cruising along, getting things going. They had a backstock of whiskeys they had saved up, and they were going pretty well and good right until about 1992, and then the bubble burst in the economy, and the ass fell out, and then no one was buying whiskey. So a lot of these distilleries that were going that weren't Nika or Centauri had to either mothball or outright close. A number of them that were actually like relatively high profile did eventually close. It took a number of years, but they just weren't able to sustain under the weight. Mars was one of these that actually did mothball. So in 1992, they shut their doors. They stopped making whiskey, but they were still bottling older expressions. And then they were dormant until 2011. And that's when they reopened. After 2011, you kind of had this, resurgence of an interest in Japanese whiskey. I believe by that point, I can't remember when it came out, but Suntory kind of had the brilliant marketing strategy of Bill Murray in Lost in Translation, which was kind of quite the card to pull. And then also there was a dramatization of the love story between Rita Cohen and Masataka Takatsuru that was on NHK in Japan, which is kind of like, it's kind of like NBC, which is massive serialized network. And so you have a populace who is seeing this story unfold about the beginnings of Japanese whiskey and this incredibly romantic tale that's a part of it. And so people started buying a lot more whiskey. So in the early aughts, that becomes a thing. In 2008, a very plucky little distiller that some of you guys have definitely heard of, named Ichiro Akuto, who owns Chichibu Distillery. He opened that distillery in 2008. He started getting distillate going by 2010. And that's really signaled this kind of new era of Japanese whiskey. So how does Mars fit into that? You've got this company that goes all the way back to the 1940s. They arguably, the founder arguably is the person who actually had the idea for the Japanese to start making whiskey. Instrumental in getting that going by eyeballing this dude Takatsuru to send him to Scotland to learn this distillation, bring it on back. And now you've got these kind of fits and starts of where Japanese whiskey is at. And the reason I bring up Chichibu as an important kind of factor in this is because Ichiro is the counterbalance to what Nika and Centauri were doing. Nika and Centauri were very much head to head. They were very closed off. They were very competitive with one another. They weren't sharing a lot of information. Ichiro comes on the scene and says, yeah, I want everybody to make whiskey. I want people to enjoy this. I want this to be part of our Japanese culture. I want to make whiskey for the Japanese people. And so he starts doing that. Everybody starts noticing pretty soon, people aren't looking to in the same way to Nika and Centauri for like what the inspiration is. They're looking to Chichibu. And so because of that, Mars found themselves in this funny situation where they were kind of like, all right, we've been a legacy distillery. We've done this for a really long time. We closed, we're reopening. Are we going to do the same thing we did before, or are we going to try and do something else? And so they decided to essentially change up what they were doing. So they had these old whiskeys that were sitting around. They started kind of like blending those into some of their new makes that they were releasing in 2011. But the idea from Hombo-san, who's the current president, was that they wanted to really lean into this kind of sense of place and Japanese terroir with their whiskeys. So they have the Komagatake distillery, which is in Nagano, like I said, high elevation, relatively cool climate. They make a very, very specific style of whiskey that I don't know. Actually, I'll put it to a poll. What do you guys think of this one? Like, what are you getting off this?
I'm really loving it, actually. It's very fruity, just kind of the way I like
Hmm.
whiskey.
Yeah, I'm loving it too. I got a lot of apple and then like tea.
Yeah, totally. That tea note is really, really like I always get that as like a nice thumbprint on all their whiskeys. It's almost kind of like that like bittersweet finish is the thing that makes you want to go back and kind of have more of the glass.
I got lemon
Um,
sherbet. There's like a zing
totally.
to it.
Yeah.
Also, the shadow cats are multiplying behind you. I just realized.
Oh, hey guys, what's up? Yep, that's Void One and Void Two.
Good names.
Yeah, no, they're that's Mushi and Gigi. They're tuckered out right now, thankfully. Hopefully they'll start to chill a little bit. Gigi looks like she's gonna pass out. 7 months old and keeping me from sleeping most nights. But uh yeah, so this is kind of the funny thing. This whiskey, to me, Komagatake whiskeys are maybe the most emblematic flavor profile for I think what a lot of people assume is Japanese whiskey should taste like. It's very fruity, it's very light comparatively, even though this is 100 proof. Um, it's very round. It has a very good sense of balance to it. It has all these kind of components that make it, you can contemplate the glass, but it's still an approachable whiskey, I think. There's not a whole lot in there that's going to be this polarizing thing where you're like, oh, that's a flavor I don't like. It's all very kind of integrated and seamless. That's very much stylistically their choice with this distillery. Generally speaking, this distillery is going to have either non-peated or lower peat whiskeys. They're going to really, really lean into like more kind of like wine casking because they're really close to Yamanashi, so they got a lot of those barrels. And then just because of the altitude and the way that the whiskey is distilled, it's just a lighter, cleaner style. Um, this is the contrasting point to the next distillery that we're going to taste, which is Sanuki. If you guys haven't already, I definitely recommend putting that in the glass. Not trying to like hustle you through these at all. Like we've got time.
I've got a
But
question.
yeah, please.
You mentioned the low peat content.
Mhm.
Is that coming from imported malt or
Yeah. So
or-
generally speaking, any peated whiskey in Japan, that is all going to be from foreign malt. So whether you're Nika, your Suntory, your Chichibu, the bulk of those producers are still importing malted barley from the UK and the EU, and it's all going to be peated there. I do find that the majority of these places they're importing from maltsters that are not in Isla because there's just not enough of them to go around. So that kind of like peaty quality that you get from some of these whiskeys as they come up in the next two that we'll have, it's not going to be like a kind of iodine like fishy, band-aidy type peat. It'll be a little bit more like campfire. Um, but now that I've said that, there are, in fact, peat bogs in Japan. So one of our producers is called Akeshi, and they're up in Hokkaido. Really, really interesting operation. But those guys actually do have local peat. So it's very, very similar to like Westland, where, Westland, I think now has, I think they did it where they did like a 100% peated release of one of their whiskeys,
They
but
did.
over the last series of years, they've been kind of like slowly integrating like local, like Washington peat into their whiskey on top of the peated barley they were already getting from somewhere else. So it's very, very similar.
So I've got a
Um,
follow-up question completely unrelated.
hit me.
Uh, Mouthfeel on the finish.
Hmm.
I a tingle that just stays with me.
Hmm.
Um, it wasn't as much on the first two, but it was there. But this one, it just stayed with me minutes after minutes. Is that a Japanese whiskey thing? Is that just
I think
this
that's
particular?
a Komagatake thing for me at least. Like there are Japanese whiskeys that do have a similar thing. Like I do feel like specifically, if you're referencing these, Chichibu has incredibly fruity whiskeys. They're very, very like if you let them open up, you let them breathe for a long time. You have a single malt from Chichibu. Generally speaking, like I get a lot of summer fruits, like red fruit, citrus, things like that. But I think Komagatake always has this kind of like it's almost like Earl Grey and bergamot. Like it's this thing where it's like it's a little bit bitter, but it also has this very, very distinct like kind of citrusy tingle to the end of it. And I think that's just how they're making their new make. Also, it's a real treat to actually do the dry glass on all of these. So I definitely recommend that when if you save a little bit of your samples and just do it for later. Um, do you guys have any more questions on the Komagatake for the time before I move on to Sanuki? All right, that's a no. Um, so like I said, they reopened in 2011. Komagatake is kind of like back up running. They're kind of keeping it going, but it's this idea of like we're going to lean into what the terroir of the area is and just try and figure it out. So because of that, every one of the releases that they put out since 2011 has not been like you'll see these releases that say Komagatake, they'll have an age next to them, or sorry, not an age, rather they'll have a year. So 18, 19, 20, 23, all that. Those are not the same whiskey that's just been aged a little bit longer in that vatting of barrels. It's literally a completely different whiskey. So, like, the 2018 version was an older whiskey than the 2020 version, and it only used ex-bourbon barrels. The 2020 version used almost exclusively Virgin American oak barrels. Last year, 2023 release, that one got a lot of port cask. This one doesn't see any port. So they're doing this in service of essentially kind of like getting their grouping down of what flavors they want to hit with their whiskeys because they kind of had a hard restart in 2011. So that's what they're doing with these. And in fact, actually, this whiskey, the 2024 of Komagatake, this is going to be the last vintage bottling. After this, they're going to be going to a consistent release that they're putting out later this year. So it's not going to be Komagatake 24, 25. It's just going to be the Komagatake, and that's that. So it's been really, really interesting seeing how they've kind of built this flavor profile and tried to figure these things out. In the midst of this, they opened another distillery in Kagoshima, all the way back down south, called Sanuki. Sanuki is actually in the original space that this all kind of started from. So it's a bit of a homecoming. So 2016, they opened Sanuki, and they start doing. I think the first release. God, the first release comes out in like 2020, just about, and it was a 3-year-old single malt called Sanuki the First. This edition that we're having is now, so first peated 22, 23, 24. So this is 5 releases in. And I mean, I would just invite you guys to try it and then tell me what you think compared to what you just had, because I think this is kind of like the interesting parallel between these two places. Hey, Moosh, come here. You want to say hi to everybody? This is little
Hello.
Mooshy.
Hey, Mushi.
This is the bug, you little knucklehead. Um, what do you guys think on the Sanuki?
Those are so different.
Right?
Yeah, this one seems like it has more character, like some funk to it. I found this one
Funk is a
more
great word for
interesting.
this. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, you've got that contrast where you had high elevation, relatively cool climate year round, even though summer still in Nagano gets pretty warm. Sunuki is sea level and it is subtropical almost year round. However, these guys are flanked by pretty large mountains. They're kind of like cratered out in the valley. So when the winter hits, it gets really cold there, actually. So it kind of has this wild fluctuation, probably a little bit closer to like what we're used to in the United States as far as aging American whiskey. Um, so generally speaking, these whiskeys prior to this last year, what we're having right now, was kind of a 90-10 split between American bourbon and then ex-sherry barrel. This one, they're using predominantly virgin Spanish oak with ex-bourbon and sherry cask. And this is the lowest heat that this distillery has put out. This is roughly 6 to 7 ppms on this one.
I was gonna say I got a hint of peat on the finish. It was just there. I thought I was losing my mind. So
Yeah,
this
no.
one is jammy. This one is like syrupy,
Yeah.
and there's like an effervescence to it too.
I kind of tend to think of these as like Komagatake is treble, Sunuki is bass. Like that's kind of like Sunuki tends to be a little bit oilier, a little bit heavier. They actually do both of these distilleries do it, but I do think it shows a little bit more in the Sunuki. They start with natural fermentation. So they literally just like let it go, let it hang out for a number of days. Then they start inoculating with yeast. So they do a distiller's yeast and they do a proprietary yeast they don't talk about. But I think that there's a real change up in terms of texture of these whiskeys, and that's probably the most prominent thing.
I think I'm more of a fan of the Kumatake over the Sanuki.
With the Sanuki, that's great.
But I mean, I'll be honest. Thus far, the tradition is my favorite thus far.
Oh, that's rad. I'm so happy to hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that whiskey needs more love, man. It's really well made and people kind of sleep on it. Well, so this kind of sets up like these two different branches of the distilleries. So not unlike Nika, not unlike Suntory, they both have their two different places. They've got Suntory's got Yamazaki, they've got Hakushu, and then they've got Yoichi and then Miyagikyo for Nika. Um, all in this kind of service of like highlighting these different areas in Japan that have a different flavor profile, a different way that they're making whiskey. And I think this is a really interesting tilt with what Mars is doing, is because they've got these two places. They really are leaning into this idea of Sanuki is Sanuki. This is a very like uh, the the Japanese marketing term for it's a little bit funny, just in terms of the English translation. But they call Komagatake a clean and rich style, and then they call Sanuki a deep and energetic style. So I'll let you be the judge on that in terms of like what is and is not. But there's a difference here. They have a different distillery team in Sanuki. They have a different blender. They have they have a little bit more room to experiment actually in Sanuki. So Sanuki, they're doing a like if you're there and you're going to see kind of like the distillery and see what they have is just like distillery only exclusives, they're doing local barley distillation. So they're actually getting local barley that's being malted. Pardon me. And then they're doing releases with that, and they are absolutely phenomenal. Um, Komagatake has the benefit of having a lot of distillate that's much older, so they blend in a lot of older releases and they kind of like level things out. So we do single barrel releases of these annually, and it's always interesting to see like what the major flavor differences are. So that kind of sets up like what this distillery is doing for just the basis, but the thing that kind of kicks it over, I think, into where they're really trying to put their flag is this next couple whiskeys that we're going to try, which is the YA series. YA stands for Yakushima Aging. Yakushima is a tiny little island off the southern coast of Japan. Basically, it's about 60 kilometers off of Kagoshima. And it's a really unique place. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, so it's internationally protected. It rains pretty much year round. The Japanese like to joke that it rains 400 days out of the year. Um, and it's also somehow more humid and I don't know, it's a wild place. I have not been able to visit myself. I've just seen a lot of videos and talked to friends of mine who have visited, and it sounds absolutely gorgeous. But what these guys are doing is because, again, Mars, the parent company that owns it, it's called Hombo. They have had a shochu distillery on this island for generations. So now, while they are not distilling on this island, they have an aging warehouse. So what they'll do is they'll take barrels of Sanuki and Komagatake, set them up on Yokoshima, let them age there, and then blend them after the fact. So the YA series is essentially a malt blend of these two distilleries that have been aged on an island that's roughly the same size as San Francisco, a little bit smaller. So you actually get continuous sea air that gets blown through the rickhouse. So they tend to be a little bit more tropical, a little bit fruity, very, very different. So this next one is the YA number two. This is God, what is this?
I heard this
Oh, yeah,
correctly.
please.
You said YA is a combination of Tanuki and
Komagatake.
that one. It's a combination
Yes,
of the two, right? Okay.
exactly.
So
Yeah.
technically, it's a blended whiskey because it's two different distilleries.
Yeah. So this is the malt blend. So, I was actually a little hazy on this. I thought the kind of like the standard term for this was calling it the pure malt blend, like going back to Scotland, trying to designate what a thing is. But I've heard recently that actually Nika owns the copyright on calling things pure malt because they actually have that for Taketsuru. Um, I don't know if that's actually 100% factual, but basically this is a blend of two different distilleries. Both single malt distilleries. There's no grain whiskey in this,
Wow.
but it's a combination of bourbon barrels and sherry casks.
And then for the Tanuki, somebody asked in the chat of what's the suggested retail on the Tanuki on the 24?
We don't have a suggested retail for it, but I've seen it. I've seen it between 114 and 120.
One of our favorite retailers here in California has it on clearance. I'm gonna post the link in the chat right now.
Yeah, grab it. Which is it the 24?
It is the 24. They have the
Which
24 and the 22.
is it KNL?
It is Kano.
Yeah.
And
Um,
we've been talking about cats all night. You're gonna have to talk about the Lucky Cat at some point. It doesn't have to be right now.
yeah, of course, Happy to, happy to.
All right.
Yeah, that's another blend we'll get into. But yeah, these are just kind of like this is them essentially saying like, hey, we have this incredibly unique place where we can age this whiskey. Why don't we demonstrate what that does? Granted, there are only three versions into this. So there was one, two, and three. Now we'll have four probably sometime in November. But as it stands, each of these has been wildly different from the next one. So, this is, let me think. This is about 16 ppms of peat on this.
Yeah,
And
I was going to say I'm getting happier. I'm a peat head, so I felt it.
it's
It's
there.
not overwhelming, but it's there. It says hi.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's funny. It's actually like, so generally speaking, all the different versions of Tsunuki were much heavier peated than this one that I brought for you guys today. Um, all right, we've got a poll going. Um, which one do you prefer single choice? Man, that's brutal. Oh, just you're muted.
That's the way we like him. Henrik, he said you're muted.
Yeah, I know. It took me a while to get to the button. Okay, never mind. It's that one. I thought it was for all of them because I was going to say we haven't tried the last one yet.
No, no, I just wanted to do the two distilleries separately because I had a feeling that Chris would like to know where the group stood on that.
I do find it's interesting where it's like it's I've done a lot of these tastings with these two distilleries to see like where people are at, and there is a preference for sure, but I also don't think it's ironclad. So I am curious what the summation is on that one.
So far,
Um,
the poll is trending in the way I agree. So, not to give it away.
that's kind of what I figured actually.
Well, I guess
Um,
there's so many people that gets it wrong.
well said.
Back on mute for
Um,
Henrik. Okay, got it.
how do you guys feel about the YA number three? Or sorry, number two, rather.
Let me pour it. I'm too busy polling over here. Pole dancing.
I like it.
These I kind of like, so the first iteration of these, it actually was very much like this kind of slightly unripe banana, like pineapple, like, and I'm not sure if it's just because it was like psychosomatic because of the island nature of it. But I get a lot of like juicy pear and more like ripe banana on this. Um, I really like this whiskey a lot. Number two is this is a solid dram. But yeah, island aged Japanese whiskey. Like, why not?
I on the first sip, as soon as it hit, it was like, okay, this is nice, but I held it for a while and it just continued to ramp up
Yeah.
and new things came in. Um, that's got to be a result of the blending and flavors fighting their way to the front.
I think actually that's so blending is something that I haven't really, we spoke a little bit about blending just in reference to EY earlier because it's a blended whiskey with malt and grain, but really not speaking too much to like the importance of blending in Japanese whiskey and like culturally where it stands. So in Japan, just in case you guys didn't know this, the blender is actually the superior position in the distillery. So the distiller is a subordinate. Effectively, like they're seen as more of a technician. They're the one who's kind of like making sure this thing is consistent and well made so that once it's aged and it hits barrel and stays for the duration that it needs to, the blender has that solid base to work with and can really paint the picture. So, you know, kind of coming back to like this thing I'm always asking myself, which is, we talked a little bit about like labeling standards. We talked a little bit about the history of these whiskeys. We talked a little bit about kind of like blends, but not much. What makes Japanese whiskey Japanese? Is usually the question I kind of come back to because it's a bit elusive. It's like everybody has this idea of Japanese excellence, I think, as a Westerner, because, it's like you think about Japanese whiskey and the knee jerk is, oh, it's balanced, it's smooth, it's, elegant, it's got all these kind of facets to it that are really considered. But when you're talking about it in terms of like how it actually tastes and how that translates, it's hard to figure out what that means, especially if you're tasting it next to, taste it next to Glenfarclas, taste it next to Springbank, taste it next to Kilchoman, like see like where these things link up in terms of other like well done scotches. And I think though that the thing that really does separate Japanese whiskey and put it in its own lane is that notion of blending. And it's partially because of the ethos of where this all came from. The reason I brought up shochu earlier wasn't just to talk about Japan's national spirit. It's actually very much to talk about what it is to make those those beverages, which is if you have something that is single distilled, you're pulling batches off that are just one shot distillations, you're going to need to keep that thing going and know how to blend those flavors appropriately. And especially because shochu is generally speaking a much lower proof spirit, you're bottling it anywhere from, 24 to roughly 32% ABV, sometimes up to 40, but it's less common. So you have this very, very low proof spirit that you've gotten on one shot. You have to really, really, really know how to blend in that sense. And I think that actually is really what lends like a lot of the kind of, call it a thumbprint, call it just like style. That's where Japanese whiskey really takes a lot of its DNA from, I think. It's just like this heritage of people who know how to blend flavors and characters and make sure that there's not one specific flavor reading high above everything else. Um, if you have one flavor characteristic in Japanese whiskey that is dominating the palate, that's not considered a good thing. That's considered a flaw. It's not how they generally make their whiskey. So again, back to that kind of idea of like, the tallest nail, whack, 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 gets hit down. Um, you're not going to have like, you'll have examples of whiskey in Japan that are incredibly smoky, like stuff from Akeshi rather. Some of those whiskeys are like 30 to 50 ppms of peat, but there's a lot of other stuff going on in them. That's not just like, oh, that whiskey's just smoky and that's that. I
By
think
the way, you have an Akashi and an Akeshi, right? In your
correct.
portfolio.
Yeah, not confusing at all.
When are we gonna taste those? Just asking.
I mean, Akashi we can do pretty much any time. Akeshi is a little trickier.
Okay. Well then Akashi.
Um,
Let's get Akashi on the calendar to start.
yeah, actually, we haven't touched that because I think that was how I want to say like you got started with that with Lily way way back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
I think you guys might have done an Akashi tasting, but
I mean, it's
happy
been
to.
5 years. Yeah, let's do it again.
Yeah, time is a flat circle. It's weird. But anyways, that's me jawing on and on and on about the kind of the ethos of these things as far as I see it. So you guys have done the YA number two. I would definitely say like now is a great time to pour the YA three. Same concept. This is a slightly higher proof. So this jumps in proof a couple percentage and then actually has lower peat in this one. So this drops down to 9 ppms of peat in this one, I believe.
Why
Oh, and I
even
almost, what's up?
what? Why even bother?
I know, I know. It's the fastidious nature of these things. Both of these whiskeys are between about 4 to 6 years old, by the way.
I actually love just that little touch. It's like a little bit of black pepper, like to
Yeah.
accent the dish and bring all the other flavors out, rather than just smack you in the face with habanero. Thank you, Jason. That's a good point.
Yeah, no, that is no. This is nice. And to Vadim's point, this is not a peat head whiskey, but it's kind of like it says farewell, on the way out.
Mm, mm.
As everybody
I,
is pouring their last pour, I'm going to invite everyone to turn on their
mm.
cameras so we can do a group photo. So Golan and Ayumu, Birkin, Mary, come back.
I'm I'm really a fan of the nose on the last one here.
I think this one has a little bit more of that kind of like, I don't know, this one's just fruitier to me. I love this whiskey. Actually, YA3 is like one of my favorites they put out. Um, I can
It's
just kind of
fruitier
keep
than
nosing
YA2,
this.
what you're saying?
What's that?
It's fruitier than YA2.
I think so. But for my palate.
It is fruity to me as well. I think it's more towards what I think when I think Japanese.
Mm,
I
mm,
do
mm.
like YA2 better though, because it remind the start for me is very Campbelltowny. I know you mentioned that earlier, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah,
very
yeah.
Campbelltowny, and then the fruits start coming in. So I loved it. The number two.
Yeah, it's really cool.
It
Um,
it it. I think. I mean, it's almost wrong of them to say the YA number two and number three because they are. I mean, they're so far apart.
how do you mean?
I mean, they to me, if you gave me those two, I wouldn't necessarily think they were from the same thing.
Interesting. So it's like you think they taste like that much
Yeah, I
independent of
mean,
one
I would
another.
compare it to, oh, here, this one is Johnny Walker Black and this one is Johnny Walker Green, kind of a thing. And
Right, right, right,
sure,
right,
it
right,
may be
right.
the same family, but it's not the same line.
So I mean, I think that's the interesting bit, right? Is that like this is so like I said, it's only three iterations in on this. They did a number of different versions where they were like uh Mars. One of the things that's really challenging about Mars is that they have so many different versions of their whiskeys. So they had Komagatake that was like the Yakushima aging, where they had just Komagatake that was going down to Yakushima. They would send that back. That was its own line. They did the same thing for Sanuki. It was just kind of like there were all these different versions that were kind of floating around. And now, thankfully, we've got three separate lines. They're just kind of what they're doing. But I think they're still very much like walking in what the blend is on the YA. And you're right. This is like YA2 tastes so much different than YA3.
Right. And I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing. It's just they're very different. So
Mhm.
you just need to know that they are different. Or don't if you love YA2, you may not love YA3.
Could be. Yeah. I mean, definitely it's like YA2 is to me is a lot more down. If you're telling me that this is a blend of Sanuki and Komagatake, YA2 is probably what I would expect more, while YA3 is a little bit more of like it's got some acidity to it. It's a little bit more vibrant. Like it doesn't have that kind of
Mhm.
smoke point.
Right.
YA3 had a lot more smoke on the nose, but on the palate, it's almost not there.
Right.
So well integrated. But we finally got almost everyone on a call, so I want to make sure we say cheers and raise a glass and smile to the camera.
Kampai.
There, while you have something in your hand.
Kanpai.
Cheers, everyone. Smile for just a second. Got it. Yeah, thank you all for being here. This is a lot of fun. We have another poll on the way out, so make sure you stick around for that. And I now want to hear about the Lucky Cat series because now I have to find one that looks like my cat.
Dude, I actually think that the next one that's coming out in about a maybe 2, 3 weeks, that's probably your best bet. So what he's referring to is something called the Lucky Cat series, which you guys may have seen some of these bottles around on a back bar or on a sales shelf somewhere. Basically, they are malt and grain blends that are fashioned after the president's cats. So Hombo-san is an animal lover. He always has been. He was a total dork as a kid, like loved bugs. So that's actually why so many Mars bottles actually have butterflies on them, and just like different genuses of insect is because it's what he was fascinated with. So he actually adopted a ton of cats into the distillery. Some of those cats have come home with him. They've become his own personal cats. Some of them still live at the distillery. But the Lucky Cat series is a commemoration of each of those cats. And the idea was to essentially like come up with a blend that would be representative of the personality of the cat. So I think we're on, God, we're coming up on 10 almost.
Yeah, 9 is the one that's
Um,
available at Candle. I think 10 is going to be the
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
One
So,
that
so
looks the most
basically,
like my cat is bottled at 39%, so I can't even get it in America.
oh, which one is it?
It's
Is it Sun?
I think so. Yeah, Sun.
Yeah, yeah.
It's only $2,000 on Cask Cartel.
I mean, like, why? So stupid.
Because
Don't,
somebody's
okay.
apparently willing to pay that.
I mean, God bless, but like, please, guys, don't. don't feed the bears. Like don't do not give these knuckleheads any sort of incentive to keep doing this type of shit. Um, yeah, like the Lucky Cat series is great. It's fun. The whiskeys are very approachable. They're not going to be the thing that like blows your hair back with complexity. They're just these kind of like approachable, fun bottles that literally are just they're more about the story of the cats than they are about the whiskey themselves. So the last one, I think it was red wine and port cast. This next one is going to be a marriage of Pedro Jimenez sherry cask and port cask. Pardon me, because there are two different cats who are President Pombo's oldest cats, and they are basically like the spoiled felines who are hanging out at his house. So it's going to be a much more decadent blend. I don't know, man. It's just fun. Like all the labels are basically in soft focus. Like it looks like somebody like smeared Vaseline on the lens when they shot the photo. Like it's just fun. So keep an eye out for those. They're definitely good bottles. But if you ever see anybody charging more than I don't know, man, more than $80 for one of those bottles, just say no. Like someone's being a prick.
Supply and demand. Supply and demand.
Yeah, I know, but I'm tired of people getting screwed for whiskey that they shouldn't be spending that money on.
I just bought a wine from Trader Joe's that had cats on it for $8. I'm good.
Hey,
I'm gonna buy
I
something just
mean,
for a label. Like I'm happy.
put a cat on it.
Yeah, and I think
Uh,
like what the price of Suntory, like these are really good deal whiskeys,
Hmm.
especially that first one. So
I mean, yeah,
I think
and
these are really
K&L
good.
have it for $30. I placed an order for a bottle of the tradition. I mean, there was a no brainer, right, at that price.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is that like so with almost all of our producers, not all of them, but most of them, because the conversation, like I said, is still dominated in Japanese whiskey by Nika and Suntory, they can dictate the price. And because those companies do fetch a very high price for those bottles, um, they're not they're not as difficult to find these days, but they're still really expensive, where it's like these things, it's not an 86 proof whiskey, it's 100 proof. You're getting a lot more alcohol out of it. It's going to actually be this thing that you can buy a couple bottles of if you want to. They're around. Um, if generally speaking, like for Komagatake and Sanuki, like you should be able to find these on the shelf for less than 130. They should be like 110 to like 120, I'd say is the sweet spot for them. Which is still not cheap by any means, but it's definitely for Japanese whiskey, it's a lot more approachable.
And to your point, it's actually single malt whiskey made at a Japanese distillery, aged in Japan. Like you're not just
Correct.
sourcing whatever from wherever. Um,
Yep.
and so for those of us just for future reference, when future releases come out, the take home between Sanuki and Komagatake is it just it's the location is like one peated, one unpeated because to me we tasted both and they were both good, but there wasn't like this is like Hakushu and Yamazaki like this is like the brand means this. They're both
Right.
it's the location, right?
It's the location. So yeah, so
Which is the
Komagatake
same,
is
same with Nika, right? I mean, they do some of that too.
yeah, I mean, actually all three of these guys, they have like the same thing. So Nika's distilleries, like Yoichi is in Hokkaido, and then Miyagikyo is in Sendai. So those are very, very different climates. Less so for Hakushu and Yamazaki. Those are actually pretty bang on. It was mostly based on trade routes when those distilleries were started and like where they were established. And then with this, it's very much this mind of like, it's a different landscape, it's a different climate. How do we actually display what that is?
That's cool.
They were both good. Wow, it's so hard to pick a favorite. All right, people did. People voted. All right. Last person to vote. Call it a day.
Yeah, I'm really curious of what was the kind of like if there was an even split or if there was a favorite, like clear winner out of the whole thing.
All right, I'm closing it down. First, I'll show you the results for the two distilleries side by side.
Yeah, please.
Which one do you think was the favorite? The results,
Sunuki.
and they agree with my personal opinion. Who do you think won?
Sunuki.
Okay, the results are in, and they agree with
Oh
my
wow!
Wow. Holy shit. 50-50. That's
It-
super
It,
cool.
on the
it,
dot.
it was not that many that was wrong.
They're both fantastic. It's fun.
That's fantastic. That is really, really encouraging. That's great.
So, and then the favorite of the night overall, I'm just gonna show you the results. You'll be surprised who tied for first place.
That's really funny.
So I'm the one that voted tradition,
Mhm.
but I could have just as easy picked the YA number 3. I picked the tradition solely because that's a $30 bottle, where the YA3 is $130 bottle.
Completely.
But I mean, yeah, I don't think that was the one I didn't care for. That's the one that didn't get any votes. The sherry cask, it didn't work for me.
Interesting. Okay, got it.
But other than that, I mean, I wouldn't be offended to having any of these drams for sure.
So just out of curiosity with the sherry cask, what part of it was the thing that you were like, not so much?
It was, I guess, too sweet. I think
Mm-hmm.
the floral part of the whiskey added with the sherry sweetness. It was just too much for me. 'Cause, I mean, one of my favorite whiskeys is a Redbreast PX.
Oh yeah,
If
but the Redbreast PX is actually one of the only things out of that line that's still like worth a damn. That whiskey's really good.
So it's kind of my wife hates sherried whiskeys generally. I think there are some very good sherry cask whiskeys out there, and there's some sherry cask whiskeys out
Yep.
there.
I'm gonna throw out there to add to what Henrik said is that the sherry threw me off because it's almost like it's trying to be a sherry bomb, but it trips over itself.
Yep,
Interesting.
You-
Okay.
I agree with you. That's a good way of putting it.
Like it's super sherry forward, but it's not super sherry forward in the way that is an enjoyable sherry forward whiskey to me.
You know what I think is really funny that now that you mention that, just like and you phrased it in that way. So anytime I've had you know, an aggressively sherried Japanese whiskey, it just doesn't hit the way I want it to. And I think part of that is because like I'm somebody who just, out of the last comment, overly sherried cherry bomb whiskeys are just not for me. I'm not gonna say they're bad, it's just not to my palate. Um, but I think that notion of it like tripping over itself is a really good way of describing it. It's just kind of like can't kind of come together in the way it needs to.
And I wonder if it's a thing with the distillate, right? Because sometimes you have a distillate that just does not agree with a particular type of cask. And being that there's already, you said it's a marriage of bourbon, sherry, and red wine casks. Adding more sherry to it is not necessarily may not be the answer. It just may not take the sherry casks at all. Especially if you're saying that other sherry cask Japanese whiskeys you've had just haven't hit right either.
Yeah, but I think also that to me is like um there's a certain degree of like what the national palate is. And there's a thing where I've noticed that like this is definitely like on the kind of like the richer side of sherry cask whiskeys that I've had from Japan. But a lot of them that I've had actually really kind of go the opposite direction. They really lean into that like almost like flinty kind of gunpowdery like flavor that you get off like sherry sometimes. And that's just not for me, but that seems to be stylistically where a lot of those whiskeys go. Where this one's a lot more round, it's a lot figgier, and kind of like has a lot more like milk chocolate to it. Um, I know it's funny. I actually like, as somebody who doesn't love sherry whiskeys, I like this, but I completely understand the criticism, and I think it's actually good feedback.
Well, and it's interesting you say that because I'm a big fan of sherry finishes. Like I love those Edredor. Like I like 100% sherry mash.
Oh, okay, got it.
So, you give me an Edredor 10 that's just been buried in sherry, and I'm all about that. Glenallachie 12 and 15 are two of my favorite whiskeys.
Right. God, that's
So,
really funny. So I bought a bottle of Glenallachie 12. This is about a year ago, and the dude who I was buying it from is a guy I've known for a minute. Was like, "Hey, I like sherry cask whiskey, but this is not like a sherry bomb, right?" He's like, "Yeah, no, it's not a sherry bomb at all." And I like took one smell, and I was like, "Ah, "Son of a bitch!" Still, wonderful whiskey because Glenallachie is the shit. But like, it was definitely like that is a sherried whiskey.
But I think to Jason's point, right? Because I'm a big fan of Kalila, and we did a tasting a while back, a sherry cask Kalila, and I was just kind of like, I was so excited to try it, and I was so disappointed when we finally did.
Mm,
It just didn't work for me. I mean, I'm no scientist, so I can't tell you exactly why it didn't work, but it just didn't work. So I think I don't know if it's the type of sherry, the and because it was raining on a Tuesday. I mean, when it was distilled, right? I mean, who knows what
sure.
what factors, but it just didn't work, and that's I think the same thing for this one. It just yeah, as Jason put it, it trips over itself trying to be sweet.
I think there's a thing too with like, it's really, we're talking about tasting things, right? We're talking about like trying to kind of like pick them apart and figure out like why they are the way they are and like what we like about them, what we don't like about them. But, it's a bit like food. At the end of the day, it's like if you in that moment, regardless of like the reasons for it, don't feel like a thing is yummy, then that's valid enough. It's just like don't go any further. That's fine. It doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that's like that just ain't it. Like in that moment, it's
As
not an
I always
academic
say,
assessment.
it's going to be boring if we all drank the same thing.
Totally, totally. Not everybody agrees. Except about apparently the 50-50 with Kamogatake and Tsunuki, which is actually fucking rad. So there's that.
Speaking of, I had two questions. One, the one through note that I've realized is you guys don't put age statements on anything. Is there a reason for that?
So, I mean, generally speaking, like the distilleries we work with, they unless it's a single cask whiskey, there's just not going to be an age statement because they're just not there. They don't have enough stock. So it's like these guys could release older whiskeys and have something kind of impressive, but they still like even if you're looking at like that kind of like 10-year-old benchmark, it's just not going to be a thing. They just don't have the supplies for it. Chichibu is getting close, which is actually it's like what was it back in 2022? They released the first 10. That will eventually go to a full and consistent release, which is like that's great. That shows progression. But with Mars, with Kanosuke, Akashi, Akeshi, those guys do not have enough stock to actually have age statements that would be worth printing on a label. Because if you put 4-year old or 5-year old like on one of these labels, generally speaking, people are not going to be that impressed. Like I know it's becoming a little bit more common these days when you talk about Scotch because they have to. They're going through the same shit that the Japanese are going through, which is like they're running out of stock of old whiskey. But Lagavulin can put a 5-year-old rum finished, whiskey out and print that proudly, and people will buy it. But if it's a 5-year-old Japanese whiskey that has $120 price tag, it's just going to be a schism, I think. So generally speaking, like these things are, just to give you guys an idea, that Komagatake was, that was 4 to 5 years old. Tsunuki, again, mostly 4, some 5 year, but nothing really breaching anything past like a 6 year mark other than the YA. Um, so I mean, you know, it's the age statement thing is tough. I don't know, like what are you guys seeing as trend in whiskey that you guys drink? Whether I mean I know American whiskey is a little bit different, but like if you guys are drinking like world whiskey, scotch, things like that, like what are the age statements that you see more frequently?
I think Scotch is different than world whiskeys for me. A
Yeah.
Scotch, you expect an
Yeah.
age statement, otherwise you feel like they're trying to like get one by you. With
Right.
world
Huh.
whiskey, you understand that it's a different climate, and so it's just not a fair comparison because you're going to put it up against a Scotch or a bourbon, and it's not fair to because a 5-year-old, like what we tasted today, is just as good as a 12 or 15 or 18-year-old Scotch, but the climate is different. So
I mean, and that's what I thought was very interesting, right? When we did Isle of Harris, I want to say it was right. All of it very young whiskey, but it tasted delicious, right? And the same thing when we did. It's been a while since we did out of Tucson Del Bac, right? Same thing, young, but I mean, again, as you say, but it's hot as fuck in Tucson, right? So it is all that fun stuff.
Yeah, I get.
I was gonna say,
Oh,
if
sorry,
you look
please go
at
ahead.
things like M&H, like asking M&H or Amroot to start putting age statements on their whiskey because there's absolutely no way that they're gonna get to those kind of age statements that that most
Yeah,
Scotch,
it's too hot.
most, I mean, M&H and, Israel and India are just not gonna be able to age for that long without having to charge, an arm, a leg, a kidney, and a hip in order to make bank on what's left in the barrel after 10 years. So I kind of see this, and you're seeing it a lot. I think kind of Henrik alluded to that, is that you've got so many young Scotch distilleries coming out,
Mhm.
or so many young Scottish distilleries coming out, that you're seeing a lot of no age statement whiskeys coming out of Scotland right now, and they're good because these young distilleries are putting out good products. And so
Agreed.
I think it's becoming a little bit more the non-age statement type of approach. I think is becoming, and from what I'm seeing, is becoming more common, unless you're one of the big hitters, unless you're Lagavulin, unless you're Macallan, unless you're, the big hitting, the big names that everybody knows, uh,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
are
yeah.
known for their age statement whiskeys. These younger distilleries are really kind of putting a dent in that idea that you have to have an age statement on a whiskey.
But then you
It's
take
pretty.
something like this, right?
Oh God, he's got the Octomore out.
I mean, who doesn't? Which is what, 5 years old, right? And so they don't put anything on, and it's one of those when, yeah, this one actually says aged 5 years, right? So it's kind of like if you do that, well, a peated Scotch, that's 20 years. Well, a lot of the peat has kind of disappeared.
Yeah, it
So
mellows out.
you want a young one.
I gotta say, man, like it's funny. I think about like, I'm as far as Scotch goes, like I'm kind of, I'm unfortunately conscribed to the cult of Isla. But you know, just the fucking classic Lottie, just like Brook Lottie, that is a non-age statement Scotch that's been around for years, and nobody bats an eye at it, and it's perfect. Same with like the initial release from Kilhoman. That was a 4-year-old Scotch. So I'm hoping that people are starting to kind of like, uh, kind of like what you were saying earlier, like get down to the trend of just like if it's in the whiskey stands on the merit of what is in the glass, not the number on the bottle. And I'm hoping that that is going to kind of keep going that direction. if it can. I not just for Japanese distillers, obviously, but just kind of like as a whole, because the age statement thing really does hold a lot of people back. What are you doing? Sorry.
But I think that's partly because, I mean, if you don't do this and do tastings, right? You assume, well, a true Scots has to be at least 12 years, right? Because that's
Right.
for the longest time. And I mean, I don't think, you saw a Scot that was under 12, and then you started seeing 10 years. And I know Craig Agalaki that has an 8 year that is absolutely fabulous, so it's just kind of like, yeah, as you said, whatever's in the glass is what's the deciding factor.
But it's tough, right? It's like, you guys all buy whiskey, and like whiskey. So no, Gigi. But when you're at the store making a decision with something on the shelf and you see, whatever, it's like bottle A is $100 and it doesn't have an age statement. Bottle B is $100 and it has a 10-year age statement. Likeliness of like if you're just trying to figure out like what it is and what you're going to buy, you're probably going to go for something that has an age statement on it, unless that's like a really, attractive backstory and package. But it's just challenging.
To your guys' point, I think what you are doing well, or at least what Mars is doing well, is putting a vintage rather than an age statement, which for consumers is like, okay, I had a kid born in 2023, I'm going to get the 2023 edition. Like it makes it limited rather than aged. So having those
Right.
like the limited releases 22, 23, 24, it makes them more special. So you're not looking for the 12-year-old, right? You're looking for, oh, okay, this is cool. It must be special if they put a year on it. It's not just their
Sure.
everyday.
Sure. Yeah, I hope they maintain some of that on future lines because it is going to go to a more streamlined fashion of dropping that annual release tag on it. But I agree with you. It's almost like you know, whiskey is whiskey, but if you want to get something for somebody special, like buy them their birth year Armagnac or cognac because you can still probably get it for like, 40-year-old brandy for like $200.
Mm-hmm. I bought an 84 Armagnac last year for a friend's 40th, and I think I paid 120. Yeah. Funny
Case
enough,
in point.
David Cannell was like, get the 85, it's better. Same price, it's better. I'm like, yeah, but I need the number. Like, it doesn't matter. It's not going to get old. It doesn't matter what it tastes like.
Yeah, sometimes it's not about that.
I'm looking at, speaking of Cannell, I'm looking at, there's a 2022 release of Komagatake that's on sale. Any insight on that one?
Yeah, 2022. I think actually the 22 is a lot more lean than a lot of the releases that came out. That one is primarily ex-bourbon barrel with a small amount of sherry cask on it, about 2 ppms of peat. I actually was not in love with that release when I first opened it, and then about a quarter way into the bottle, it was like, oh shit, this thing is singing. So that's the kind of funny bit with some of these whiskeys. They just need time. Like they really need time and air exposure to actually become what they're going to be. The Komagatake 22 was that release, I think. And I actually was really bummed that I killed my bottle last week.
Nice. Yeah, at this point, I'm looking for something interesting to have to bring to bottle shares and events, and like we all know the big names. We've all seen those the very common ones, right? And so I'm trying to open people's palates to something. Hey, this is Japanese single malt whiskey made in Japan. Try this, and it's in this case it's under $100 because that's kind of where I like to be. So
Right.
like great. I can afford that. I can afford to share that. I don't feel bad. As opposed to like earlier this week, I was working a private event and the host brought out a bottle of Hibiki 21. And it was
Sorry.
good, but it was at Costco it's $700. So like that's not a bottle I can pick up.
Yeah, it's like how good?
It was good.
Yeah. I mean, like, don't get me wrong. Like, I love Hibiki 21. I love Hibiki. I was at a bar last night and somebody just like, with all the confidence in the world, walked up to the bar and was like, I want to pour a Hibiki 12. And the poor bartender was like, what? Um, but for that, it's tough. And that like sub $100 price point, honestly, like probably like if you're looking for something retail that's like full grain Japanese whiskey, that's single malt, Kanosuke,
That's
Kanosuke single malt.
I love Kanosuke. You can't go wrong with them for sure.
Yeah, it's really like that. That is probably like,
And
and
it's a
people still
beautiful
sleep
bottle
on
too.
it. What's up?
It's a beautiful bottle too.
Beautiful bottle. It's good. It's like, yeah, if you show up anywhere with that as a bottle, like no one's gonna be like, oh, what's this Bammer ass shit you brought? It's like it's just good. Um, but those guys are doing it right for sure. Like with
So years ago, I hosted.
oh God, you have the Grail.
Well, so this is years ago. I hosted some Japanese folks, and as a gift, they gave me a Suntory pack. Had the 17 Hibiki 17, the Yamasaki 12, the Hakushu 12. Now this was before I drank whiskey. So, a friend came over. Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god! Here, have some.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't.
sure,
I
sure,
don't
sure.
drink whiskey. And she was kind of, "Are you sure?" And I guess I really should have caught up to that comment. But it's so yeah, it's one of these days I'm actually gonna have to drink the rest of this. But it's kind of interesting to have.
I mean, honestly, like those blends they're phenomenal. I miss them, especially because Hibiki Harmony is just so okay comparatively. Like it's a good whiskey. It's not a great whiskey. Hibiki 12, 17, 21, great whiskeys. Like amazing. Um, I don't know. I miss those. So glad you got them.
Can I throw a question on go back to Mars a little bit? I got a bottle of this of the maltage Cosmo.
Yeah, sure.
Speak a little bit about to speak to that line at all because it was
Yeah,
a
yeah,
pretty
yeah,
interesting
yeah.
bottle that I got, and I got it as a gift, and I had no idea what to expect from it because it was the first Mars bottle I'd ever seen in my in my collecting days, and it was interesting when we open because we popped it open and had thoughts, but I'm going to wait to hear what
Yes.
you say about
Well,
it.
just out of curiosity, which one is it?
It's the Manzanilla, the maltage Cosmo.
Okay. So Manzanilla is at the 2020 or 21.
This is the 21.
All right, cool. All right. So Cosmo is basically that is a series that was released in Japan, and they have a number of different versions of it. And basically, they have just like one black label one that's just called Mars Maltage Cosmo, and it is basically the only whiskey in their lineup that is a marriage of distillate from Komagatake and Scotch from an unknown distillery. So that's what that is. So that's basically it's a blended whiskey from, you know, Komagatake and then Scotch whiskey that was finished in Mezzanilla sherry barrels.
So that's interesting. It's because it's not even listed. It's not on the label it's a blend, but it doesn't list anything about what's
Yeah.
blended. So that was why the curiosity.
A good kind of tagline when you're looking at a Japanese whiskey label from like one of these guys, if it doesn't say Japanese and whiskey next to each other on it, then you're like, okay, blend. Then you got to do the sleuthing of like what the origins are, but that is the only line where they employ foreign distillate in from like single malt into their
Okay,
whiskey.
gotcha. Yeah, because I was, the only description on it is like this two-sentence line, and it says blended malt whiskey, and then it's palate, and then it's notes. So
Right.
it's like blended with what?
With what? I know. That's very Japanese. So yeah, that's exactly what that is. I also like again, back to the kind of the sherry bomb thing. I oddly really like that whiskey. But I know it's not everyone's cup of tea. So It's like one of those things that, like, for the price point, hopefully you didn't pay too much for it. Like, it shouldn't be that expensive. Um,
I didn't pay anything for it. It was a gift. So,
Great. Perfect.
it's already down to here.
Yeah.
But I also, well, I put it, what was fun is I put it in a lineup with some friends. I have a couple different groups of friends that I also get together with, and I create these random lineups, and I put it in what I called the funky wine finish.
Okay.
And it was on the lower end of the ABV, so it came in early, so it probably didn't get the love that it deserved with some of the other stuff that I put in there. But it was a lot of their first experience with a Japanese whiskey, so it's kind of
Mm,
a nice way to introduce and say, not only is this kind of an interesting wine because you don't see Manzanilla a lot specifically,
totally.
but it's also here's some Japanese whiskey to try. It's blended, but I can't tell you what else it's blended with.
I mean, that's the funny bit is because, like, okay, so that whiskey is specifically, I had to do a little bit of sleuthing on that one. Um, in the before they do the finishing in Manzanilla casks, has a butt ton of Oloroso in it. So I mean, it's mostly Oloroso casked whiskeys that see finishing in Manzanilla, which is like cool, you did that, but also like I drink a lot of Manzanilla sherry. There's a little bit of that comes through. Like you get some of that salinity, you get some dryness on there, but it's not the dominating flavor profile, I would argue, out
Yeah.
of that whiskey.
And that was kind of like the universal consensus was that it's like, okay, this doesn't taste all that funky from a wine finish standpoint. This seems
Yeah. Yeah,
fairly
yeah, yeah.
familiar comparative, in comparison to some of the other stuff that I put in there, because I put I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, but I have a Glenallachie Gratamico
Okay.
that I put in there, and then one that was finished in five really kind of interesting wine casks. So it was a really broad stroke of wine casks. And so when people were like, "Yeah, this doesn't taste all that different than what I've had before," that explains it.
Yeah, yeah, completely. I know it's funny. It's like I actually gotten that a bunch recently with a number of different really, really prominent distillers that are doing finishing in Sauternes casks. And it, it's tricky, man. Like that's a hard thing to do when you're like layering a lot of other flavors in there initially. And like, most people don't actually know what Sauternes tastes like. So it's just like sweet. And that's what you get out of it. But you don't get that nuance and dynamic out of the wine necessarily. So
It's
Aaron
interesting because I'm
Sutter.
a big fan of Satan finish as well, but I've also noticed I've had some that are absolutely fabulous, but I've also had some where it's kind of like, oh, that was kind of a waste, right? I
yeah,
mean,
it's like when you get ones that are good, it's like the light bulb goes on.
yep.
It's like, oh shit. It's like I haven't had that before. That's super cool.
But so I think that I mean it goes a little bit back to the sherry cask finish we talked about before, right? Where some it works, others it doesn't, and again, without any necessarily precise ways you can say that it doesn't work because of this or that. It just doesn't work. Either it was finished too short, too long, in the wrong temperature. I mean, who knows, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's I don't know. That's the funny fleeting nature of all this stuff, right? It's just like what works, what doesn't. Sometimes you catch a good one, sometimes you get a cherry barrel. That's always the funny bit, is like, pardon me, we just did a series of single cast releases from one of our distilleries. And, some of the releases were like very, very, heady and interesting and super cool. Like they had all this like promise to them because of the type of barrel that was being used. And at the end of the day, the best one was just it was just an ex bourbon barrel because it was just a cherry barrel and it was just good. Like, it's sometimes that's just what it comes down to. It's like it's great when there's a lot of cross play, but Sometimes, you just need the simple thing, like let the distillate shine, see where it
Keep it
goes.
simple, stupid.
Yeah, pretty much. But yeah, I agree. I don't know. Do you guys have any other questions on Mars or what they're cooked up to? I don't know who's here anymore, actually.
A handful.
Few humans. Yep. Got it.
The people who are diehards. No, I mean anything coming down the pipeline that we should be excited about.
Well, I mean, so let's see. What do we got from Mars? We are going to have their consistent release of Komagatake in the fall. We're also going to have their, what is it? They're going to have an anniversary edition coming out. Three new editions of Bakemono, which I don't know. Vadim, have you had those? So Bakemono are those are our single cask selections for Mars. So we always do every fall we release a single cask of Komagatake, single cask of Sanuki, and a single cask, or sorry, a double cask rather of YA.
Oh, wow.
And so those are really, really interesting whiskeys. They've I actually just pinged David at KNL today to see how he was doing on them, but you can still find those out there in the world. They're really good. But cast strength Japanese whiskey from these distilleries.
Wow. And what's cast strength usually?
62, 64, somewhere in there.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Noticeable difference. Because sometimes it's like you release your stuff at 50, but cast strength is 53, and it's like, I'm not gonna pay double.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean I think the double cask is like around 55, I want to say. Um,
They have it in their
they're really
office,
cool.
but they don't have it in stock.
Yeah. So those are going to be lurking around again in the fall, and that's kind of like that's the totality from Mars. We'll have another Sanuki release 2025. We'll have YA number 4 coming out, but basically all that stuff usually hits, in another 3, 4 months. That's kind of how it tapers out.
Cool.
So we'll have that, and then something new actually is for any of you guys who are like really, really stoked on just like new Japanese distilleries, there is a distillery from Oita called Kuju. Really fucking interesting place, really interesting guy. His whiskey is amazing. It's really delicious stuff. So he is he's a really funny guy who's, despite the fact that like all of our distilleries are either independently owned or family owned, it's really, really hard to maintain a whiskey business if you don't come from some sort of money. It just doesn't work most of the times. Like the thing you need for whiskey is time, and the investment on that is massive. So the guy who started Kuju is he's the guy who organizes all of the Fukuoka whiskey talk conventions in Japan. So it's like outside of like Tokyo Bar Show, it's one of the other like biggest whiskey conventions in Japan. And he got his distillery off the ground in 2020. So they have their initial release, which is a blended whiskey of his single malt and then Scotch from Scotland. It's called Green Dram. That stuff is actually delicious. And then he just released his first iteration of like 3 year plus single malt. And all the reviews I've been getting in from it are like, this is the thing that's happening now. It's like this is the guy everybody's going to be talking about. So we'll have those coming out hopefully in October. Um, I don't know. They're really, really cool. It's a very, very different way of making whiskey. He is obsessed with Speyside. That is all the dude wants to make. When I was visiting the distillery, I asked him what his favorite whiskeys were, and they were basically like all Speyside distilleries that haven't existed in 30 years. So he's a student. and he's really, really interested in it. And he's doing this pretty much completely crowdfunded. Like he does not come from money. He actually like crowdsourced money to get his distillery off the ground. And he's just doing the thing. So Kuju is the thing I'm the most excited about coming out this year.
Cool. We'll have to be on the lookout for that. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, of course.
All right, any other questions? I think we've held you long enough. This was super educational and really insightful. We really appreciate it. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, man. Happy to be with you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I already have
this was fun.
messages asking for the YouTube link.
This was good stuff.
Right on.
We're
Sorry,
looking
what was
forward to
that?
having you back for another. There we go. More cat. There we go.
Yep. We'll see if I can do this without these two knuckleheads like chomping all over the keys. Yeah, we'll figure out how to get. It'd be great to do something with Akeshi just because they're so unique.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see what we can figure out.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. That'd be fantastic. I'm
But
nearly booked up for the rest of the year, but we can look into like early 26.
that's great. I'm like I'm so saturated right now. I'm like this is easy. This is just like chilling with people and just like talking about whiskey. It's great.
Yeah.
But it's always a thing where I'm like, oh, God, there's one more thing to plan. That's right. Gotta do it.
Sure.
So
At least you don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to you don't have to drive. You don't have to put on pants. You can just chill with us.
I'm one of those psychos that like I can't imagine a world in which I was doing something like this and did not actually like put on shoes or pants. Like I don't actually wear shoes in my house, but I need to have like something on my feet for this because it makes me feel like I'm actually like dressed for work.
Yeah.
Very strange.
The pants thing is mostly a joke. I hope everybody's wearing pants.
Or not, whatever. You know,
Hey,
Donald Duckett. Just go for it.
I have underpants on.
I knew Henrik was going to have a
That
comment.
counts. That counts. That counts.
Silver platter.
Very much appreciated, guys. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being so hospitable. Hopefully, there wasn't too much rambling, but thank you for giving the attention to this distillery. I think they're amazing.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. We'll see you at the next one.
All right. Cheers, gang. Y'all stay up.
Cheers.
Thanks, Chris.